Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event this evening. The title of the event is going to be The Trees of Cascade Park, a forestry report by Ethan Brady. This event tonight is brought to you by the Lawrence County Historical Society, as well as Pleasant Hill Historians and Westminster College. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce many of the individuals that are present here today. As you will come to realize within public history, there are many individuals that make up us as a group, and this presentation is an example of how public partnerships such as this are able to be beneficial for our community. And so without further ado, I'll introduce the members of the Lawrence County Historical Society. Jamie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Jones. I'm the administrator of the Lawrence County Historical Society. I graduated from Clarion University with my bachelor's in history in 2017, and then I expect to graduate from the same college with my master's in library science with a focus in archives this December.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. And Claudia?
Yes, good evening, everybody. My name is Claudia Manley, and I am the new volunteer coordinator for the Lawrence County Historic Society. I am a native of Newcastle. However, I spent, after graduation and going off to school in Minnesota, I spent about 50 years in the Los Angeles area working in the mortgage banking industry. And after I retired, I came back to Newcastle and have been volunteering at the Historic Society since then. So that's sort of my story.
Thank you, Claudia. Next up is Westminster College. Ben, are you with us this evening?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. My name is Ben Nelson. I'm an alumnus of Westminster College and a volunteer. As Andrew noted on the slide, I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees Community Sustainability Committee. I was asked to join the show tonight by the Young Alumni Committee of the Alumni Council. Very happy to be here. And we'll turn over to Dr. John Winters, a visiting professor of history.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so I'm the visiting assistant professor of history here at Westminster College. I am a historian of Native America and museums in something that I call the long 19th century. So I think a lot and write a lot. I've got a book coming out in 2022 that's all about museums and public spaces and how the public interacts with various historical topics. I've also worked in museums in various capacities for the past almost 10 years. I've been I used to supervise the tour guides at George Washington's Mount Vernon in Virginia. I've worked on the new permanent exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian in New York City. And I've also spent about 6 years doing organizing and developing public programming at the Roosevelt House Institute for Public Policy, which is also in New York City.
So thank you, Dr. Winters, for being here today, and thank you, Ben, for being here as well. I just also wanted to note some other individuals who are part of this presentation this evening: Dr. Patrick Krantz, Associate Professor of Environmental Science at Westminster, as well as the co-director of the Center for the Environment; Dr. Russell Martin, the Professor of History and Chair of the History and Philosophy Department at Westminster College, as well as Jennifer Huff, who is the Assistant Director of the Professional Development Center. And myself, I'm Andrew Henley. I'm the president and founder of Pleasant Hill Historians. I'm a 2017 alumnus of Westminster College, as well as a board member of the Lawrence County Historical Society. I wanted to introduce as well my associate historian, Gabby Lucas. Gabby?
Hi, everyone. Like Andrew said, I'm Gabby. I'm a senior at Westminster College, and I'm double majoring in political science and history. And as Andrew said, I'm an assistant historian with Pleasant Hill Historians, which basically translates to I do whatever research Andrew asks me to. But specifically regarding this, I was really involved with the National Register eligibility reevaluation for Cascade Park. So I'm really excited to see this presentation and see the next steps in this.
Gabby has co-authored the 2 publications that we have with Pleasant Hill Historians, and as she had stated, was part of the successful reevaluation of eligibility for the National Register for Cascade Park. We have, through our internship program, we have partnered with the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the Society of French Protestantism in Paris, France, the Luis de Silva Ribeiro Public Library and Regional Archives in Terceira, Portugal, the Yon Departmental Archives in Auxerre, France, the Huguenot Museum in Rochester, England, Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, Lawrence County Government, Arts and Education at the Hoyt, the Lawrence County Historical Society, the City of Newcastle, Sense of Connection, Youngstown State University, Slippery Rock University, the University of Pittsburgh, my alma mater, as well for my master's, and then the Carnegie Mellon University. We've been able to provide internships to students from Chatham University, Clarion University, Duquesne University, and specifically this evening as we highlight our Westminster College interns. And so tonight, I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quick for a photo opportunity just to document everyone that's present here this evening. And thank you all for also joining us on Facebook. Unfortunately, you aren't in our photograph this evening, but we'll be sure to document you as well. Give me 1 second. Smile, everyone. Awesome, thank you. Now let me share my screen again, and then we'll go over some housekeeping for this evening. Our agenda is our introductions, our presentation done by Ethan this evening, our Q&A session and salutations or closings. Please mute your microphone while you're not speaking. And during our Q&A session, you can raise your hand to ask questions, or if you're on Facebook, go ahead and type in the question and we'll be sure to ask that of the presenter. This will be recorded this evening and posted to the Historical Society's YouTube page afterwards. And I wanted to ask if anyone who our farthest participant is this evening. And so if you want to drop that in the chat or state that here, I'd like to just document that. Anyone outside of New Wilmington or Lawrence County? Okay, Reno, Nevada. Sydney, Australia, that one's hard to beat. Ocean City, Maryland. And I'll wait for some Facebook to catch up. I'm not sure anyone's going to beat Sydney, Australia, but okay, we have Pittsburgh, but right now they're in Philadelphia. And Little Rock, Arkansas. Awesome. All right, well, I believe West Middlesex, PA. Yes, we have someone in Mercer County. So I appreciate you all joining us this evening. I'll have to say that it goes to Sydney, Australia. I believe that's Mariah Roberts, a Westminster alum herself. And so I'll be sure to get in contact with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Ethan Brady. Ethan, I will stop sharing my screen and so that you can begin your presentation.
All right. Like Andrew said, my name's Ethan Brady, and I'm a senior environmental science major at Westminster College. And this summer, thanks to Pleasant Hill Historians, I was able to complete an internship, which ended with a forestry report for Cascade Park, and that is what I'll be presenting on this evening. So on June 10th, 2021, Cascade Park was deemed eligible for the National Register of Historic Places as a historic district by the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office. This allows and encourages more extensive research and documentation of the rich history of Lawrence County. The eligibility also provides funding and for park restoration and improvements. On the right side of your screen, you can see the book, one of the things that Andrew talked about that he and Gabby authored about the park that led to part of this eligibility. So the National Register of Historic Places is a list of historic places administered by the National Park Service, which is within the Department of the Interior. In order to get registered, the process may be started by the work of individuals, organizations, local governments, and/or tribes. In this case, it was Pleasant Hill historians who started the process. To qualify, the district must fall under at least one of the 4 criteria you see on the screen. The PA Historical and Museum Commission marked the period of significance beginning with Colonel Levi Brinton and the 1891 Brinton Park, as it is tied for the oldest trolley park in Pennsylvania with Highland Park in York, Pennsylvania. So that's why it qualifies as criterion A. And then, oh, sorry about that. And then it also, PHMC also identified criteria C and D as secondary qualifications because of the potential for further research on the architect Frank Blaisdell and his construction and design of the park, as well as the archaeological potential information from the Native American settlements that were along Big Run within the park. Some of you might be curious if the eligibility and listing on the National Register of Historic Places restricts park development, and as long as there's no government funding, we can do whatever we'd like with the park, and any construction or demolition can happen. This summer, we partnered with the Westminster Center for the Environment to provide tours for the Westminster community and alumni, as well as the Lawrence County community. The tours were $10 a piece, and Andrew and I led them. Andrew talked about the history of the park in general and told them about the buildings and significant places. And I overviewed my project and pointed out specific trees and interesting things about the project. I'd like to thank Dr. Helen Boylan, Director of the Center for the Environment, and Dr. Patrick Krantz, the co-director, for helping us with that and allowing us to do that. Those funds that we raised went to the Center for the Environment. So the importance of the project, my work provided historical and biological information about the park that strengthens the case for the park to be registered as a historic district. It also provided an inventory of all the trees in the park, which can lead to assessments of forest health and composition, as well as further research in invasive species. And it also brings attention to the beautiful Pennsylvania landscape and foliage of these trees within the park. So as part of the bigger project, we are researching landscape architect Frank Blaisdell, who was a civil engineer and architect born in Boston, Massachusetts. He was the son of William Blaisdell, who was a general in the United States Civil War. He died in Virginia in 1864 during the war. After his father's death, Frank attended West Point, where he studied civil engineering, and then afterwards he served as an engineer in the U.S. Army for several years. And got his introduction to architecture when he assisted with the designing of the Army and Navy Club building in DC. He got a lot of early experience as a landscape architect for trolley parks across the Northeast, which was a big thing in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was hired to design landscaping at Cascade Park in 1897. He was also hired for several parks around Boston and Ravenna Park in Chicago and Electric Park, and several other parks throughout the Northeast. He went on to become a very successful landscape architect. He designed several buildings, but he stuck mostly to landscaping. And in 1911, he was hired to design the Arkansas State Capitol building grounds, which is kind of his biggest thing that he did. So as far as the identification and surveying of the trees in the park went, to make it a little more manageable, we split the park down into 9 tracks, which you can see in the graphic on the right. And within the open areas of these tracks, specifically in tracks 1 and 2 here and in 5 here, trees were recorded individually by species. I would just walk up to them, identify them, and write them down. And then for the denser areas, the more forested areas, I wrote the species as I found them and then put tally marks next to those species when I saw them again. For trees of significance within the park, I identified those as trees of a large size or age. So if something was substantially large, or I just felt like it could be very old, I would note that and do further research into it, as well as using early photographs. So taking historical photos and identifying trees within them that are still present in the park today. And then atypical Pennsylvania species that are native here, or at least not native. I marked those down as well because that's interesting. And then placement of the trees, their landscape aspect, I also recorded those. So for common typical Pennsylvania species, I identified them visually through their leaves and their branching patterns and their bark, and then their flowers, seeds, or buds. I'm qualified to do this. Throughout late elementary school and early high school, I was involved with 4-H forestry and wildlife. And when I was 12 years old, I competed in the Pennsylvania State forestry competition for 4-H, and I placed fourth. My brother actually placed first, and my other brother placed second, and then one of our friends placed third. So they went on to the national competition. Unfortunately, I was too young, so I couldn't compete at that, but they actually won the national competition for the first time in Pennsylvania history with a 3-man team too. So that was pretty neat. But yeah, so that's why I'm good at identifying trees just by looking at them and stuff. But for less common species or species that presented atypically, I used the Illustrated Book of Trees by William Carey Grimm as a guide to identification. It has lots of helpful diagrams and descriptions of the trees. When it came to ornamental species, invasives, and shrub species, I documented them when I noticed them. I wasn't necessarily seeking them out, as I was mostly seeking out just trees. But if I couldn't identify them, I would use Picture This, which is a mobile app for the phone, and it allows you to take pictures of them, and it gives you a description and the species. And then based off of that, I would do further research online to confirm that, and I would record them thus. So for measurement and age assessment of the trees, DBH is kind of the most common way to measure a tree. It means diameter at breast height. So basically you have a measuring tape and you pull it around the tree at breast height, and that gives you the circumference. Then you just do the math to find the diameter. We also used an increment borer, and that provides you with a long cylindrical core sample where you can actually count the growth rings on the tree without having to cut the tree down. Another technique was using historical photographs, so comparing photos from the late 1800s and early 1900s to modern day and seeing if those trees still existed and getting an age assessment based off of that. The tools I used were a Forestry Supplies Inc. Forester's tape and a Mora increment borer. So as far as aging with DBH is concerned, you can find tables online that give numerical growth factors for the different tree species. When you multiply that growth factor by the diameter breast height of a tree, you get a fairly accurate estimation of its age. So I have an example on here. If a red oak is 36 inches in diameter, it has a growth factor of 4. So when you multiply that, you get 144, which is a fairly accurate estimation. And this technique was used for the majority of the significant trees throughout the park. So here you can see the increment borers. You can see they have a threaded tip up here. It's very sharp on the end, and you just drill that into the tree and just twist it with your hands until you get the whole way in. And then there's a little rod you shove in the back that knocks out the core sample, which you can see to the left of the borers. And you can kind of see some of the rings on there, and you just count those and then you get the age. This on the left is a hemlock, and you can see the branch that I left on here with the needles. And then on the right here is a sweet gum tree, and you can see the leaf and the seed pod there. So for tract 1, this is uphill from Cascade Boulevard on the right side of the entrance, and that goes down to the downhill side of the bocce ball courts and along the wood line of the parking lot. And this is all open areas. There are no forested areas in this. It's all standalone trees. So I just walked up to them and identified them. The stand was dominated by mixed maples, red sugar, and Norway maples. And you can see tulip poplar or tulip trees were actually the most common tree there, but because we had red maple and sugar maple right behind it as 1 and 2, and then Norway maple is number 1 for the non-native species, you can see why I gave the dominant species to maples. Yeah, and so these are non-native / ornamental species in order of dominance. And I also didn't list anything for invasives, which most people think if something's not native, then it's invasive, but when it comes to landscaping trees, such as these mixed ornamental prunus species, which are just cherry trees, the ginkgos, the dogwood, the forsythia, and the magnolia, they don't really count as invasive because they were put there on purpose and they're not invading into the environment. And with Norway maples, they've been naturalized in the United States for a very long time, and they don't really cause a whole lot of issues because they're very similar to other maple trees. So I didn't qualify them as invasives in any of these. Within Tract 1, we can see there's 2 sweet gum trees that appeared in early postcards, as well as a tulip poplar tree that appeared in an early postcard. And these sweet gum trees, one of those is the picture you saw with the increment borer, and we believe that at least these 2 are Blaisdell trees. So Tract 2 is basically the opposite side of Cascade Boulevard from Tract 1. It's from the entrance over to the creek and down around that fence behind the Vietnam Memorial and down behind the carousel to the bathroom by the playground. It's a mostly open tract with a small dense stand of trees behind the carousel building. In the open areas of this tract, eastern hemlocks were the dominant species, followed by red maple and white oak and red oak, all common Pennsylvania species. So that makes sense. And then within this, there were also a lot of ornamental species that I've listed here, and none of those were invasive because, like I said, they're just there for landscaping. The dominant species within the dense stand of trees behind the carousel was black walnut, another common Pennsylvania species, followed by tulip poplar and sycamore, all common. And within that dense stand, there was one invasive species, and that was tree of heaven, which is detrimental, not only for the reason that all other invasive plants are detrimental, where they take up the nutrients and the space and the light of other plants and don't have the natural predators and diseases that other plants do, so they're able to outcompete stuff. But also tree of heaven attracts spotted lanternflies, and if you see them, you'll typically see them on the bark of these trees. So that's something we do not want within the park. Within Tract 2, identified 2 trees as significant, a large pin oak and a large white oak. Pin oaks are native to Pennsylvania and fairly common, but they're also often used in landscaping. And because of the size of this tree, when I first saw it, I thought that it could possibly have been planted by Frank Blaisdell, though we just discovered that it wasn't old enough to do that. And that's true of the white oak as well, where it's a very common thing, but often used in landscaping as well. So Tract 3 was basically just the area along the stream of Big Run from the entrance to the park down to the old lake bed. It's mostly densely forested just along the creek. Another tract where hemlock is the dominant species. And these, you see hemlock, sycamore, slippery elm. These are all trees that are very common to find in wet soils, especially along creeks and rivers. So it makes a lot of sense that they're there. Same is true of basswood and a lot of trees within this. Within the non-native trees, there were black alder and Norway maple, which are both fairly common to see around Pennsylvania, but are not native. But I didn't throw them in with the invasives. For the invasives, there was tree of heaven, obviously, and oriental bittersweet, which is a vine that kind of just takes over everything, grows over all other trees, and just chokes everything out. So it's a pretty big threat. And these are the falls that I'm assuming a lot of you have seen within Cascade Park. And that's part of Tract 3. And you can see here and all these evergreen trees along here, those are all hemlocks. And, you know, even in this old photo, it's still dominated by hemlocks, and that's still true to this day. So that was pretty cool to see. Also within Tract 3, there was a sawmill upstream from the falls. It was built by Robert Patterson, and in an article from 1877 was described as decayed at that point. So we know it existed sometime before then as a functioning sawmill, but at least a decent bit of time before 1877. The reason this is significant is because stray seeds from the logs being brought into that mill and the trees being brought into that mill could contribute to the diversity of species along the stream when the seeds are carried down through the water. Okay, Tract 4 is a narrow strip of land at the edge of Tract 3 and along the southern border of the park, and it ends around the old pool. It's densely forested area with a few standalone trees. It was dominated by black cherry, another common Pennsylvania species, and we see the same few at the top again: slippery elm, red maple, red oak, hemlock, walnut. I highlighted willow oak here because it's a less common Pennsylvania species. It is something that we do find here often, but there's only a few in the park, so I thought I'd highlight that. And then for the non-native species, you've seen most of these before as well: the Norway maples, the tree of heaven. We're seeing bush honeysuckle now for the first time, which we'll see a lot of from now on, which is a pretty bad invasive for the same reasons that it just chokes everything out and can grow quickly and just take up all the nutrients. And we also have tree of heaven. So within tract 4, I identified 3 trees as significant. I talked about the willow oak and how it's a semi-uncommon species. We also had a red oak that was 38.9 inches in diameter, making it the second largest tree I documented in this report, and then a pin oak of 33.6 inches in diameter, which is also a very large tree. For tract 5, this is like the picnic grove area and extended upwards towards the old pool. It's all forested mostly with a hemlock grove and then some open areas where the picnic tables are. Hemlocks dominated this area. It's probably 3 or 4 to 1. Honestly, it's just mostly hemlocks. But you can see we have a lot of the common Pennsylvania species we've seen a lot so far. White ash, that's pretty cool because I'm sure you've heard of the emerald ash borer and the way they just decimated the ash population all across the United States and especially the Northeast. So it's good to see those. And then there were no invasives, but there were Norway maples. And this is a bridge built by Frank Blaisdell leading to the picnic grove. And you can see it's made of like unfinished logs and branches and stuff. And that's called twig architecture. And he did that to complement the beauty of the native Pennsylvania forest and make it look like it fit in more naturally, as opposed to putting in cement or metal bridges. I think it looks great. And that's cool that he did that. So within tract 5, there was an eastern hemlock that we used an increment borer to approximate the age, and it ended up being 187 years old or more. And that makes it the oldest tree we found in the park. And it was only 22.8 inches in diameter, which is a lot smaller than some of those oaks were, but hemlocks are able to grow pretty slowly in low light situations. So that makes sense with that. And then there was also a 27.9 inch white oak tree. Tract 6 is the large tract of forest behind the old pool and along Big Run and the eastern and southern borders of the park, so just down from tract 4. This is all densely forested with some trails running through it. Mixed elms were the dominant species. That's slippery elm and American elm. And you see tulip poplar and red oak and sycamore and basswood. A lot of these trees also grow really well along streams and stuff, so it makes sense that we have specifically slippery elm and sycamore along the stream within this tract. And another Norway maple, tree of heaven. We now have autumn olive within this tract, which is another invasive that is pretty bad in a lot of parts of Pennsylvania for the same reasons. And then same with Japanese knotweed, that it grows so fast and it just takes over areas so quickly. So we need to watch out for that. This is the old Cascade Lake that was within this tract. And there's still like remnants of a dock down by the second bridge on Cascade Boulevard, and you can kind of see where the lake could have been there. The lake also could have contributed to the types of species and the diversity within the tract, because certain species, like I said, prefer wet soil. So having a lake there could contribute to that. So within tract 6, I identified 3 significant trees, 2 of which I identified just because of they were the only 2 of their kind within the park. So southern catalpas, which look similar to northern catalpas, but they have a few key differences that I spotted on this one. It's a southern species, hence the name, and this is just slightly outside of its out of its native range. I don't think it was planted or anything like that. It just is interesting that it happened to be growing there. There's also an eastern cottonwood, which is a tree you find in Pennsylvania, but it was the only cottonwood that I found within the park. It was growing along the stream Big Run there, which was pretty cool. And then there's another willow oak within this tract. So again, a semi-uncommon species. Tract 7 is a very large forested area to the right of the old entrance road as you come down from the upper entrance and get past the second bridge that you have to walk across. It's just off to your right. It's dense and it's like an older growth forest, which makes sense that it's dominated by red oak and elm and maple and white oak. These are hardwood species, so the older a forest stand is, the more likely it is to be dominated by these hardwood trees, and there's a lot of hardwoods within the first couple lines of this species in order of dominance. Again, we had Norway maple and bush honeysuckle. No tree of heaven that I saw within this tract, which is a good thing, but it definitely will be there since it's everywhere else in the park. Within this tract, there was a white oak that's just across the bridge, the second bridge that you have to walk across. It's up to your right, kind of hangs over the road there. It's really beautiful. It makes almost like a gate into the trail. And I just selected that because it's an interesting landscape aspect. It's just beautiful. Tract 8, this is just uphill from Tract 7. It's off to the right of Cascade Boulevard. It starts at the second bridge and works up towards the playground on the other side of the road there. And it's also very densely forested, and it's dominated by red oak as well. And you see the same few species up at the top here because those are a lot of hardwood, common Pennsylvania species that like to grow in forests like this and have space and nutrients to get big. Tree of heaven, bush honeysuckle, Norway maple, and Japanese knotweed. We've seen all those before, talked about all those, all big threats and all within this tract. So I highlighted a bitternut hickory within this tract. There are several bitternut hickories within the park, but this one was substantially larger than the rest of them. It's only 28.3 inches in diameter, but I just thought it was interesting that most of them were probably only about half that size. For the last tract, Tract 9, it's the forested area between the parking lot and like the playground on the uphill side of the road, and it's very densely forested as well. Also dominated by oak species. You can see that the American beech actually was the most dominant species technically. And that's mostly because there's one big stand of beech trees, because beech trees shoot up from the roots of other beech trees. So you'll just see a whole bunch of them in just one area. So I tallied probably 30 of them right in a row without having to move at all. That's why they're the most dominant, even though I have mixed oaks up here. You see same species pretty much in this tract. Another tree of heaven, Oriental bittersweet, bush honeysuckle, all three invasives that we've talked about so far. And within this tract, there's a very large white oak at 33.5 inches in diameter. And that's kind of right up at the edge of the parking lot by the entrance to the trail there. And then a red oak that was actually 40.1 inches in diameter, making it the largest tree I recorded in the park. So that was pretty cool. These are notable trees that I selected from those significant trees. We have the sweet gums and the tulip poplar from Tract 1, because these appeared in those early postcards, and we can assume at least the sweet gums are Blithedale trees. We don't think that the tulip poplar is one because of the photographs we'll show you shortly, but these gums about 25 inches in diameter, and with the core sample, they were both about 125 years in age. And then the tulip poplar was 37.3 inches in diameter, making it one of the bigger trees in the park. And it's at least 140 years old. It's probably several decades older, but we don't really have an accurate estimation of its age. So this is the photographic evidence I was talking about, and these steps have obviously changed, and this road's actually changed a little bit too, but you can see there's several small trees growing right behind these men. They look like they were planted fairly recently. I believe this photo was from 1901. It was very early 1900s. And we decided that these are probably the same trees you can see here. Specifically, these two are the ones I measured because they're the easiest to kind of identify. They look like sweet gums in this picture, though it's hard to tell because it's old and grainy. And actually, there's probably 6 or 7 sweet gums within here that are probably all of these trees growing right here. And then this tree that you can see here with the split in it is the tulip poplar that's still standing in that same position. You can't really see it in here. It's kind of back in this shadowy area. but it's still there, and it's a good bit bigger now, very old tree. But it was really cool to be able to identify these trees here and also have them still be existing now. And that's the most evidence we have that any of the trees that they were Blythedale trees, because this was just after Blythedale had worked on the park, and these trees were probably put in at 5 to 10 years old. And these same species exist in the same locations that are old enough to be those trees. So we can assume that these sweet gums along here are Blythedale trees. And then I have some notable trees that were just notable for their age and species. The red oak, we talked about, those 38.9 inches, 156 years old. One of the white oaks, 122 years old in tract 4. And then the eastern hemlock, which was the oldest tree in the park that we talked about, was 187 years old. And then we have the southern catalpa, which was less than 10 inches in diameter. And that's assumed, but it wasn't even big enough really to measure. And it's probably only 10 to 30 years old, but it's just significant because of its species. And the same is pretty much true of this eastern cottonwood. I wasn't able to get to the tree close enough to measure it, but I assumed it was between 20 and 25 inches in diameter. And then that would make it 40 to 50 years old or so. So some further research that can be done at the park and off of this report, utilizing more of the historical photography and recreating more of those historical photos to identify as many possible Blythedale trees as we can. We noticed a lot of historical photographs that we think might have had trees that still exist. But that is a really long process to try to actually figure that out and get the angles correct so you can recreate the photos and tell if they're in the same place. So we didn't get to do a lot of that, but it would be really interesting to continue that work. It also would be cool to do a biodiversity assessment of the park, which would assess the overall health and diversity of the forest. And as well, we could do an inventory of the invasive species and then come up with plans for treatment of those species to get them out of there so we have a more native and natural landscape within the park. I also think it'd be interesting to create plaques for the notable trees, especially those trees that are above 150 years old, like the hemlock. You could list dates and events that the trees have witnessed throughout time. And you could also put important information about the species on those as well. So I'd like to thank Andrew Henley for providing me with this internship through his company, Pleasant Hill Historians. And I'd like to thank him for the supervision and cooperation he had with me throughout the summer. He's a history person. I am not a history person at all. I'm a forestry person. He's not a forestry person at all. So it took a lot of back and forth and cooperation to actually get some stuff done this summer. I'd like to thank John Hudson of Hudson Forestry Services, LLC. He helped me with my surveying methodology, and he helped me with the identification of several trees that I was having a hard time identifying. And then I'd like to thank Ralph Wilcox, who is the National Register and Survey Coordinator at the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. He's actually a Westminster alum, which we did not know going into it. We just emailed this guy that was his office to get information about Frank Blythedale, and he responded with, first off, I'd like to say, go Titans. I'm Westminster class of 95. So that was really cool to see a Westminster alum out there in the professional world so far away from Westminster and just happen to be in contact with him. That was really neat. A huge thank you to Dr. Patrick Krantz, who's the environmental science professor and field station manager at Westminster College. He provided a ton of important resources and methodology advice when I was starting this process. He also assisted with the identification of trees within the historic photographs, because those are a lot harder to tell when you can't really see the leaves up close, but he was able to tell based off the morphology of the tree what some of them were and to help me identify them that way. And he also provided all the measuring equipment I used throughout my project. I'd like to thank from the city of Newcastle, Mayor Chris Fry, Brian Heichel and the Parks and Recreation team, as well as city council members Mary Ann Gavril, Patsy Chapa, Brian Cameron, Tom Smith, and Tim Fulkerson, and the Cascade Park reevaluation team, Gabby Lucas, Andrew Henley, Rachel Pusateri, Peyton McKinley, Carly Plessick, Sarah Small, Septimus Bean, Sandra Krill Baumgardner, Evelyn Genkinger, Alexandru Georgescu, Mary Ann Ustalovich, Henley, and Walter Lucas.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ethan, for presenting this evening. Now we're going to go into a Q&A session. And so without further ado, if you have any questions, either on Facebook or on here, please raise your hand or message in the chat. To begin, though, I wanted to just address some questions that were in the chat. There's a question from Mariah Roberts. That's the one from Sydney, Australia. She asks, what is the threshold for the context of old?
As you can see with a lot of the notable trees that I pulled up, anything over 100, 150 years, we consider to be pretty old. Pennsylvania was clear cut several times. So throughout most of the state, you can't find very many trees that are significantly older than that. So for our purposes, about 150 years, 130 years was kind of the threshold for what old was. And some of them we thought would be older based off of size and turned out to be not quite as old as we wanted them to be. And that's why some of those were included in the significant trees, even though they weren't technically very old.
There was a question in here. Does that twig architecture bridge still stand?
Yeah, no, it does not. Yeah, there are no twig there were several twig architecture bridges throughout the park after Blaisdell did his work, but none of them are still standing this day. There's just concrete bridges and a couple metal bridges now.
This one was, will removal efforts be done to remove the invasive species, especially the tree of heaven? I'm not sure if you know exactly the answer, but I'm going to go ahead and give it to you, and then I think there's more to add to it. Go ahead.
Okay. So as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing to do with that, and I would have to go either with the park itself or the city of Newcastle deciding to do that. And that is a big project, and getting any invasive completely out of an area is expensive and time consuming and very hard work. So that would be something that they would have to consider and give the funding for. And Andrew, if you have any more information.
Yes. So the city actually has contracted John Hudson to work as a forester for the city to address some of these concerns. And so that, I don't know if I ever shared that with you, Ethan, so I apologize.
Good.
We have a question from Dr. Winters.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, Ethan, very, very interesting. You've done a lot here, and I know, as you mentioned, you're a tree guy, not necessarily a history guy. I am also a history guy, but I'll try and make some ends meet there. So I'm really curious. This project is really interesting particularly because you're working in a place that really connects with a lot of different historical trajectories. Right, we're talking about a park that was developed in the Gilded Age and Progressive era, sort of this golden age of Newcastle. We're talking about catering to a particular type of clientele, people who were escaping the hustle and bustle of these vast industrialized cities and going out into what they thought was this sort of nature preserve, and doing these different things. But it was also a very controlled kind of nature, right? This sort of landscape architecture was borrowed from something that had evolved in the middle of the 18th century, which was this very careful application of different native species as well as non-native species to create sort of the presentation of wilderness and this sort of sense of something that is not urban and not modern. So when you were going through all of these and you were digging through these trees and you're looking at these different copses and how the density of them and all the invasive species, I'm genuinely curious, if you had your druthers and you had control of this project and this park moving forward, now that it is recognized under the National Historic, one of these spaces, what would you want to do with this park? Return it to its former glory, or would you like to change it in some way that you found to be more interesting, more related to the more science aspect of the research that you did?
So that's a great question. And I think I'd like to return it to kind of how it was before. And that goes along with like the twig architecture and stuff like that, because Pennsylvania is so great. And a lot of the Northeast is so great for this, because our natural landscapes can be semi-rugged and just absolutely beautiful, but it's not like out in the Rocky Mountains where you have to be in great shape and stuff like that just to be able to walk around and enjoy yourself. So I think it'd be great to leave the forested areas how they are, except for getting rid of the invasive species, obviously. But like even to reincorporate rides into the park, there was a ride called the Comet, and it went under a couple other names, that kind of went down through the gorge of the park and through all the trees and everything. And I think the idea of being able to have an amusement park, but have the amusement park within this densely forested, like natural landscape, I think that's amazing. And I think with like addition of twig architecture and just a little more building up, but not making it look really modern or anything like that, just kind of complementing the natural landscape. I think kind of a combination of its former glory and what we know today about preservation of native species. I think it'd be really interesting to do something like that with it.
Thank you. We have a question from Ben Nelson. Ben, do you mind reading your question?
Sure. Let me go back and let me find it. Yeah, I had a couple of questions. I'm curious what you would put on the plaques. Would you focus on a certain area, or would it be more about the trees themselves? And then, what would it cost to do something like that? And do you have to follow regulations, especially with it being registered with as a historic spot?
So I don't know about the approximate cost to install them or produce them, but I would put information about, and obviously there'd be several different kind of types of plaques for different types of trees. So for trees that were just an interesting species or an interesting landscape aspect, I just want them to talk about the species itself and why it's important. So like just general information about where the species originates from and stuff like that. And then for like the older trees, like that 187-year-old hemlock, that tree's witnessed a ton of history within the park itself, but also just it's existed for a lot of American history. We haven't existed as a country for all that long. So just to be able to put dates into perspective where that tree was alive during, whatever war or, whatever major historical event. I think that's something that's very interesting to see. And I know with a lot of like the California redwoods that are several hundreds of years old, they'll cut down the tree, old logging trees from back in the day, and they'll put markers for different years of like the Revolutionary War, Boston Tea Party, stuff like that. Something like that would be interesting for the older trees. And with the regulations, like I said earlier, unless we get government funding, we can do put in changes to the park. And that does become restricted with the government funding, but I know there are also exceptions to that. And Andrew will be able to answer that part a little better. So I think we could install them, and I'm sure that's up to the Parks and Recreation Department. But in terms of through the National Registry, yes, we could install them at this point.
We have a question from Ralph Wilcox, who was mentioned during the presentation. And so, Ralph, do you mind asking your question?
Sure. My question, just out of curiosity, was whether the city of Newcastle is going to proceed with having a National Register nomination done for the park.
Andrew, if you want to kind of field this one, I know that they're working on a lot of the stuff that the research that goes into getting the park approved and actually listed on the National Registry. But if you want to give any updates on how that process is going.
Sure. The city right now is in conversations about the possibility of that. In Lawrence County alone, there is one other historic district, the North Hill Historic District, which is the third largest historic district in Pennsylvania. there has been some difficulty with understanding what National Register listing means. There's potential of it actually benefiting the city in a very positive manner. As we all know, Parks and Rec is typically underfunded. So this provides matching funds of $100,000 through the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission's Keystone Grant. And I think if I was involved with Parks and Rec and you were providing me matching funds, I'd be really happy. And so this could benefit the park. Right now it's in discussions within the city. Great question though. Dr. Winters?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I don't want to occupy all the time tonight, but questions keep coming and they keep popping up, and I want to ask them. So, how to I guess frame this question? So I'm interested in the more scientific work that you do and the potential, possibly the limits of the scientific work you do, particularly when thinking about how environmental history is a new field among historians. So thinking about the landscape, and obviously the most important part of it, like with any history, is thinking about the human being's impact on the landscape. So I'm quite curious, when you, in your normal course of study, when you're actually studying, when you're looking at these trees, and maybe even aided by comparisons to some of these historical images, things like this, I mean, can you get a sense of like time-based, but ultimately like human impact on the park? Obviously it was designed, it was curated, it was cultivated, all of those different things, right? But presumably it fell, like people attending or going to the park stopped during the Great Depression and it never really recovered, right? And then Newcastle itself and things occur. So I'm curious if you got a sense of, or if you're able to think about forestry and think about the work that you were doing as time stamping, like different ways that the park was used, at what time, in what areas. Like, can we get a sense of this particular spot was thinned out because we think people lived here for a little while when maybe they weren't supposed to, right? And really kind of looking at the earth to find where the people are. It's a little bit of a nebulous question, but I'm curious if you have any insight into this.
Yes, so to some extent, like with trees that were that seem to have grown naturally, like the pin oak and white oak that I highlighted in track 2, those trees definitely were not planted. At least in my opinion, they probably were not planted. But when people were doing like the preparation of the park, and it would have been later in history because those trees were only just about 100 years old. So they chose to leave them there, and there's a lot of like evidence of that. And there's an overlook in the park along the stream, and you can see a stand of trees that's much younger than most of the trees around them, because that's it within one of those kind of older growth areas. And there's these massive oaks, and then you'll see small sycamores and small tulip poplars and small oaks, and that's evidence that that was once cleared so that there was a better overlook there. And you do see like areas behind the carousel where there's a small dense stand of trees. All those trees were very young, and they had super high concentration of the invasive species, specifically the tree of heaven in that tract. So the invasive species do kind of correlate with the most human disruption of the area, because when succession occurs and when an area is cut or like cleared out, invasives have advantages over native species and are able to take over more. So in areas where you see a lot of the tree of heaven and a lot of the oriental bittersweet and the bush honeysuckle and trees and species such as that, you can kind of see the human influence on that. If that's kind of what you're going for with that question, I'm not sure if I answered it correctly.
Yes, you did. And it sounds like there is some kind of mapping project waiting to happen to see the ebb and the flow of this particular park.
Definitely.
We have a comment from a local archaeologist, Brian Fritz. Brian?
Yes. This is Brian. Your tree survey is very interesting. Criteria D on National Register nominations, usually that's falls into the realm of archaeology. But I think there might be a compelling argument that your tree survey satisfies criteria D. And I was wondering if you would be interested in pursuing that with the State Historic Preservation Office to see if they would entertain that as evidence for criteria D significance.
That would definitely be something I'm interested in. I wasn't aware that would, I knew that the biological information contributes to the approval of the park as a historic district, but I didn't know that would help to qualify it under that criteria. So yeah, that's definitely something I would be interested in pursuing further with the registry.
And we had one follow-up question from Ben.
Yeah, and thinking about some of the other comments that have been raised since, I was wondering what's the current state of signage in the park, in terms of historical or other signs. What's your sense? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they non-existent?
I would say they're closer to the bad and partially the non-existent. But there are some signs for trees throughout the park that were done by as an Eagle Scout project a number of years ago. The signs weren't entirely that well made, so they're kind of, the paper underneath the plaque is kind of warping and molding, and it's hard to read. And one of the trees, I actually realized this summer, they identified the tree incorrectly. They identified it as a flowering dogwood, but it's actually a Kousa dogwood, which isn't a native species. But yeah, so there's not a whole lot of plaques. And Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if there's even a whole lot of historical plaques. I know there's a couple, at least one up by the falls, but in terms of overall like signage throughout the park, there isn't a whole lot.
Yeah, at one time there was an Eagle Scout project that's focused specifically on historical pieces. However, as Ethan had noted with the trees that were documented, weather has gotten underneath the signage and it would need to be recreated. There was a comment that was on Facebook. It was in question with respect to historical aspects of the park and events at the park, that there are books available at the Historical Society, and thank you for pointing that out. There are books available at the Historical Society written by some of my colleagues about Cascade Park that showcase many of the historical photography that you've seen today. And I think it really tells a story of how the park was modified for entertainment purposes. Are there any other questions? I do see a commissioner of Lawrence County on here, and as well as Dr. Martin, the chair of the history department, if you'd like to make any comments.
I'll defer quickly to Dr. Martin. Thank you, Andrew. I do serve as one of the Lawrence County commissioners, but tonight, more importantly, I'm a Westminster graduate, as many of you are. Ben Nelson is right below me on the screen. It's nice to see you, Ben. Ethan, this was a tremendous report that you gave tonight. And for a person who never did too well in biology and chemistry, whether it be in high school or college, you made it simple enough that I could understand just about everything you said. So no, this was wonderful. So my thanks to Ethan, and Andrew, as always, thank you. And I'll defer now to Dr. Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I was preparing to defer to you, but the thing that impresses me about this, and I did enter it a little late, I'm afraid, is the what I would call the multidisciplinarity of it. You were quick to say you weren't an historian, but actually you were presenting evidence and observations and experiences in a way that I would consider actually pretty good for an historian as well. So you should consider, going back for the master's. And I urge historians to think about how you presented as well. I'm also kind of impressed by the list of people on the screens, which seems very diverse to me. People in government, local government, people who are across different disciplines. And of course, led by John Winters, who's our new guy in history at Westminster, who really is running point for projects like this. So I'm really glad to see him. So I really think that as much as this is a really important project, the best kind of local history, which brings together environmental history, preservation, students, government officials, the community. It's really just a perfect project. So I applaud Andrew for his ongoing efforts. I also want to say that I really think that this is important for us in history as we think about the various ways we attempt to answer the question, what are you going to do with that? That moms and dads ask whenever their kid comes home and says, I'm going to major in history. And this is one of the answers to that. And John Winters probably has the best answer of them all. I mean, I'm a medieval Russian historian. I don't have the answer to that question, actually, but he does. So bravo to all of you for coming, and to Andrew for building a relationship with Westminster College that I'm hoping is going to be very enduring, and for showing what the humanities can do.
Well, thank you. If there's no other questions, I'm not seeing any on Facebook. I'm not seeing any on here. I wanted to, again, thank everyone for joining us this evening. All of those who hosted the session this evening, Kara Montgomery, our Senior Director of Alumni Engagement, Chad Serafos, the new Director of the Professional Development Center, Ed Petrus, the President of the Historical Society, Lorraine Petrus, and Stephanie Felina, the co-chairs of our programming committee at the Historical Society, as well as Kathy Wisniewski, our former administrator of the Historical Society. Now, I've given a lot of opportunity to Westminster, but I do want to give this opportunity to our members at the Historical Society to really talk about how, if this is of interest to you, or if local history is of interest to you, how you can really participate at the Historical Society. So Claudia or Jamie, whoever wants to take point.
Sorry about that. Well, I'll step in real quick because I have probably the least scope to chat about, but it's become pretty evident to the board of the Historic Society that while we have some very terrific, dedicated volunteers that really put in untold hours on various projects at the Historic Society, it's also important to bring in some new, younger volunteers and get them engaged in the process. And so that's where my position has recently come into being. So if you or anyone is interested in doing volunteer work, we have quite the gamut of projects that we'd like to get started. Particularly through the Archives Committee, whether it's logging we just finished the petitions for the declarations of intention into a searchable database. We're going to be working on the petitions of naturalization, along with marriage certificates, other projects like that, which will then not only enable us to preserve the original documents, but also to provide a way for people to use that information for their own personal uses. So again, I would love it if any of you know of or are interested in volunteering, just give me a buzz. I can be found at the Historic Society on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And I'll let Jamie, as the administrator, take it from there.
I mean, honestly, Claudia, I think you covered it pretty nicely. Right now, all the projects we're looking to run mostly are through the archives committee, and they run a wide path of, at the moment, we're working on, again, digitalizing the marriage licenses and the petitions for naturalization. We're working on finishing up digitizing the declarations of intention, just checking over that data to make sure that it is accurate and ready to be uploaded online. And once again, if anyone would,
Preservation of antique clothing that we're working on.
oh yeah, I did forget about that. It slipped my mind. But yeah, we have a lot of projects, and if anyone watching this with us today, it knows someone who might be interested in helping us with these projects, reach out to Claudia, reach out to myself. We'd love to have you in.
Well, thank you both for joining us this evening and for being our hosts as well. I do have a hand raised by Commissioner Vogler. And so, Dan, go ahead.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll be very brief. Thank you for your courtesy. For those of you who live within driving distance of Cascade Park, I would make a very friendly recommendation that it's worth visiting, both from the perspective of the history of the park. You can still make out some of the old foundations, the roller coaster, for example. Some of the buildings have historic qualities to them, and but as just as important, just the natural beauty of the park with Big Run and the waterfall. It's a nice way to spend a couple hours just walking through the park and imagining what was there at one time and what's there now. It's particularly at this time of year with the leaves that are changing. And then finally, you mentioned antique clothing. I might have an old leisure suit from the 70s in my closet. I'll be donating it. Thank you, Andrew.
We'll take it.
Thanks,
And
Andrew.
Ethan, you did an unbelievable job. You should be very pleased with yourself. It was great. It was great.
Thank
It was
you.
a very nice presentation. I learned a lot from it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, I wanted to thank you all for joining us this evening. Our next presentation will be on Quaker Falls Artifacts by Logan Minch, as Westminster senior as well. And it will be next Thursday at 7 o'clock. Thank you all.
Night.